Can you hear me well? Hi, everyone. So thank you for being here. Who here knows Algolia? Cool. OK, good share. So Algolia is a hosted search API. For those who don't know Algolia, Algolia is a hosted search API that lets you build search interfaces reliably and quickly. So you can then integrate it in your mobile application or your website in no time. We have API clients, we have front-end libraries, and we're also hiring. So yeah, feel free to go to algolia.com/careers if you're interested in a position at Algolia. All right, so my name is Sarah. I'm a software engineer in the Docs team at Algolia. And recently, we released a brand new version of the Algolia documentation website. So you need to understand that at Algolia, we have many open source libraries. And the documentation, which is mostly on the documentation website, is also split in other websites of Algolia. Namely, we have the community website that holds a good share of the remaining documentation. And that's the case of InstantSearch. So InstantSearch, if you have never heard of InstantSearch, is the family of front-end libraries for building search experiences. So we have one in vanilla JavaScript, Vue, React, Angular, iOS, and Android. And it lets you build search interfaces quickly and reliably. So one of the big tasks of migrating of the new documentation was to migrate the InstantSearch documentation from the community website to the main documentation. And for us in the Docs team, it was a great opportunity to upgrade the documentation experience of InstantSearch. So this is a search UI. And as you can see, every part in red is a widget. It constitutes a search UI. So you have many different parts, many different widgets. And so, for example, you have a search box, you have the hits, you have filters, you have buttons to clear the filters, drop-downs, etc. The list goes on. This is what InstantSearch provides. So it gives you that out of the box, and you can compose your interfaces quickly without thinking of the data or the logic. It just integrates with Algolia and lets you build that in no time. The thing is, Vue InstantSearch has more than 27 widgets. And it's even more in React InstantSearch and even more in InstantSearch.js. The problem is, when you see a list of widgets like that, you're building your interface and you're like, OK, I don't really know what I need. It's really not helpful when you see a long list like that with names that doesn't really speak anything. Let's say you're building a search, right? So you're building a search for phones, and you want to filter by brand. What do you need? Do you need a menu widget? Do you need a hierarchical menu? Do you need a refinement list? I wouldn't know. And that's the problem with written documentation. As good as it is, it's really complicated to actually describe visual elements. So what we wanted to do in the Docs team is that you are able to interact directly with those widgets. You see the widgets, you can click on them, you can see the names, and you can directly access the documentation. So we decided to build a fully working interactive showcase of all the InstantSearch widgets, of everything that InstantSearch has to offer. So basically what we did is that we translated this long list into an actual search UI that works. This way you can see all the widgets, you see the names directly, and you can access the documentation. We created 3 experiences. The first one is a full search interface. The second one is an autocomplete menu. And the third one is a geo-search experience. So in this presentation, we will go over the implementation process of this showcase. We'll see like a few details of the architecture, and we will see how we solve problems for each interface using namely dynamic components, scoped slots, and mixins. All right, let's dive right in. So we created a fully separate Vue.js app, and we integrated in the docs using an iframe. So this is separate. This is on a separate server, and it's integrated right in the docs with an iframe. And for that, we used Vue.js, and we used Vue InstantSearch to power the search and the widgets. So for each experience, we created 3 components. Each experience has a component that acts as a view. OK, so what's next when you have that? What do? Do you simply import widgets in the views? You compose a few interfaces and call it a day? Well, not so fast. Those are 2 typical widgets that you can find in Vue InstantSearch: hierarchical menu and refinement list. So they are quite similar. And the thing is, we didn't want to pack a big interface putting all those widgets that look alike, because that would be too much, that would be confusing. So the idea that we had is that, OK, we're going to take those widgets that look a little bit alike, and we're going to combine them together and allow you to switch between one and the other. This way, you have an interface that really looks like a search interface, and you're able to switch and see the differences between similar components. For that, we created a custom component that we called the widget switcher. And if you look at this interface, so this is the interactive showcase. So all those blocks here with the gray border that you can see, this one, etc., those are widget switchers, and they pack one or several InstantSearch widgets. This is a typical rendering of a widget switcher that packs several widgets. So as you can see, the widget switcher, you use it directly and you pass the components that you need. And then the switcher powers the title, so it shows the titles and lets you switch on them by clicking on the title. You see the docs button for the current widget, and you see the widget itself. So this is what the switcher powers: the view logic, and also the switching strategy. And I will talk to you about that in a little while. Let's look at some code. So to do this here, this is the code that we have. So you instantiate the widget switcher. You pass it a prop that is called widget, and you pass that prop a collection with a title, which is a string, and the body, which is actually the component. All right, so how is it really possible to do that? Usually when you import a component in Vue, you declare it on the component's property. This is the usual way of doing it, and this allows Vue to do its magic, and it's going to expose it in the template as a web component. But before being a web component, a widget that you import, like this, is a JavaScript object. So instead of exposing it as a component, what you can do is simply return it from the data factory function. And when you do that, you actually have access to it as a JavaScript object, a plain JavaScript object, and you can pass it around in props, which is really interesting because then in the switcher, you can render it using dynamic components. So who here knows what a dynamic component is? Cool, OK. So what are dynamic components? They are anonymous components that can take the shape of any static component that you have. You pass it a prop, you pass your component as a prop, and it takes the shape of this component. If you're into Pokemon, this is a bit like the Ditto of components. Metamorph. All right, so let's look at the switching strategy. So here we are in the widget switcher. What do we do? So we have this collection of components, and what we do is that we loop over them, and each is rendered into its own dynamic component. So that's how we instantiate the widgets inside the switcher. Then we hide them all, but the first one. And when you switch, what we just change is the class. So basically, you switch between hidden and not hidden. So what it does is that it just repaints the view. But obviously, there is an issue. It would not be that easy. Meet the refinement list and the menu. Those widgets, InstantSearch widgets, look similar, but they're fundamentally different. One lets you pick several filters and add them together, while the other one actually lets you only pick one. And from an Algolia and an InstantSearch perspective, this behavior is not compatible. So you cannot have both in the same interface at the same time, because InstantSearch won't render it properly. So the issue is that we want to have them both in the same interface, but we can't. So how are we going to do that? Basically, what we want to do is have only one in the Vue model at the same time. So what we created is an alternative switching strategy. So this is an alternative switching strategy. This is optional, and you can force it. And basically, instead of looping and creating one component, using one dynamic component for each widget, you only have one, and it takes the shape of the first widget that you have. And then when you switch, basically what changes is only this. The current widget index, we change it to the new index. And what it does is going to destroy the component, remount it with the new widget, and repaint. So from a browser perspective, this is a little bit more demanding than the first one, because in this case, we destroy, we remount, and finally, we repaint the UI. The first one, we only repaint. This is why we decided that it would be an alternative strategy that you can opt in for, but this is not imposed. By default, you get the first one, and then if you need to, because you have components that are not compatible, you can use this strategy. All right, so we are done with the first experience. Now we have to build the next one, which is an autocomplete menu. So the funny thing about autocomplete menus is that they come in many shapes, there are many ways that you can build an autocomplete menu. And so at Algolia, we decided we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so we didn't include the view part, like the rendering part. What you get when you use the autocomplete widget is the data and the logic. And then you're able to wire it with any third-party component that you want. How do we do this? Who here is familiar with slots? Cool, a little bit more people. Okay, so we can go a little bit faster on this one. Basically, when you use slots, you have a parent component that accepts a child component, and you can pass some arbitrary data to the child component that will be rendered in the child component in a slot. So basically here, you have the child component that is instantiated. We pass it the data. And here in the slot, this goes here. That's the idea of slots. But there's even better. There are scoped slots, which is basically slots on Red Bull. So the idea with scoped slots is not only you get to pass arbitrary data, but you also have access to data from the child in the parent. And so you're able to customize the rendering of your child component with knowledge of the data. So in this example, we're looping over to-dos, and we're giving access to the parent to the to-do, the current to-do. So here we are able to send some arbitrary data, but it also has access to the current to-do. So you're able to render it from the parent to the child. That's the beauty of scoped slots. And this is exactly the strategy that we picked in Vue InstantSearch, that the InstantSearch team has picked, to let you personalize components as you see fit. So what does that mean for the autocomplete? Because for now, we only have the data and the logic, but we don't have any rendering. But now we're able to download any third-party autocomplete that we want and stitch it together with the autocomplete widget from InstantSearch. So here you have the code, simplified, code of the final autocomplete that we have on the interactive showcase. So you can see in red that you have the AIS autocomplete, which is the widget from InstantSearch. In green, you have the template that retrieves the data from the components. So this data that you see here, indices and refine, it comes from AIS autocomplete. So we have now access to it. And here we are able to instantiate our third-party Vue autosuggest component and pass it the data and the logic from AIS autocomplete. So basically, we have indices, which are the results from Algolia. We are able to pass them to the suggestion prop of Vue autosuggest. And we have refine, which is a method that we get back from AIS autocomplete, which basically triggers a new search. And we pass it to the onInput change hook, which is basically going to refine the search, so send a new query every time that you type something or you change something in the input. So as you can see, all we had to do is instantiate the autocomplete widget from Vue InstantSearch, then use scope slots to get back the data, and finally stitch it together with the Vue autosuggest component. Good. Now all we have left to do is that geo-search experience. Algolia supports geolocated search. You are able to look for positions based on coordinates. And so we wanted to build a geo-search for airports with a list of airports here and over there a map, which is basically the same results. The thing is, Vue InstantSearch is a little bit younger in the family, contrary to React and InstantSearch.js. So there is not yet an out-of-the-box component for geo-search. So this time it was not about personalizing a component that only has data and methods and logic. It was about creating a brand new component for geo-search. So as we saw earlier, Vue InstantSearch uses slots, scoped slots, to do the personalization. And it is a little bit different from the other flavors of InstantSearch, let's say React and InstantSearch.js, which use something else that is called, when it's going to move. All right. Okay. Connectors. All right. All right, this way. Connectors. So what are connectors? Connectors are functions that encapsulate all the logic that you need to make widgets. So every connector is specialized to make a certain type of widget. So basically think of the widgets, this is the renderless version of the widget. So you don't get any rendering, all you get is the data and the logic. In Vue InstantSearch, we don't have connectors per se, but what we can do is import connectors from InstantSearch.js and build upon that. So this is what we did for this experience. Here you can see that we import the connect geo-search function from InstantSearch.js, so the connector geo-search. Then we import a utility that is called createWidget mixin from Vue InstantSearch. And this function is taking a component, and what it's going to do is that it's going to create a mixin that is going to give you access to all the data and all the logic and all the lifecycle steps of an actual geo-search widget. So there, when you look at your component, when you inspect it, you can see that the mixin created a state property and that you have access to all the data and all the logic of a geo-search in your custom component. So what we did is that we used this in combination with a third-party component that is called Vue2 Google Maps. And we were able, from this data that is exposed by the mixin, we were able to get all the data that we needed and to use it to generate markers and info windows. So basically, we have access to this state. Everything is on this state, and we are able to map on it and do all sorts of things, and then generate our custom UI. So the code is simplified. You don't see all the Google Maps properties like the zoom, etc. But the gist is here. So this is all the code, like this is the meat of the code that you need to create an actual GeoSearch component with Vue InstantSearch. While at the beginning you had nothing. You had no component at all. And just with this connector and this little utility, you're able to create it in very few lines of code. So what did we see during this presentation? We saw that Vue InstantSearch fully embraces the simplicity that we love about Vue.js, or that I love at least. And it lets you build search interfaces in no time with virtually no limit. So as you saw, there are some limitations in Vue InstantSearch because some things were not implemented yet, but it did not prevent us from creating what we wanted while keeping a code base that is healthy and readable. So in the Docs team, this is the second app that we've built in Vue.js. The first one is an interactive tutorial that you can find if you go on algolia.com/doc. You will find it right away. And this one is the second one, and so far it's been a blast. We love using Vue, we love working with Vue, and this is probably the very first of a long list of separate apps that we build with Vue.js. And of course, every time that we do some nice discoveries, we'll share what we learn along the way. Thank you. Do you have questions? We have a catch box somewhere.
Hello, thanks for the talk. I wondered if you have implemented the same kind of documentation for React, the interactive documentation that you built in Vue. If you can port what you did in another framework.
Sure. So what you saw, we built it with Vue InstantSearch, but at the end of the day, what we want is the interface. So we don't care what we use, what flavor we use. So there is no need to rebuild it in React because you don't actually have access to the source code. What you have access to, so you see the interface, and then we are able to know on which flavor you are. Because when you are on the Algolia documentation, you have the ability to switch between flavors of InstantSearch. So when you're going to switch to React, you're going to have basically the same interface. But sometimes, the documentation will point to other places. So it will point you to React. If it's for Vue, it's going to point you to Vue. If it's vanilla JavaScript, the same. And we take into account the fact that, for example, in InstantSearch.js, you have the GeoSearch component. So it points directly to the documentation of this component. While in Vue, it's going to point you to a tutorial that explains you how to do it yourself.
Perfect, thanks.
You said that you used Knifeframe to put the mini app in your website. Did you have problems doing that? I mean, connecting with the whole app or not?
No.
Okay. So it was a standalone application that...
Yes.
Okay.
So we serve it on another Algolia domain,
okay.
And we integrate it in the docs directly. So yeah.
Okay.
Any other question? Don't be shy. Okay, we can talk about it afterwards if you want. Cool. Well, thank you.